Stacy was only 8 years old when her life became a silent storm. She was a bright and innocent girl who loved to read and draw, her imagination a vast world where she found solace. But everything changed the day her mother passed away. Her mother, Evelyn, had been the glue that held their home together. She was warm, nurturing, and deeply protective of her only child. Stacy had never known a life without her mother's comforting presence, and when death took her away, Stacy's world crumbled. The house felt emptier, colder, as if the warmth had been drained from the walls. Her father, Pastor Michael, was a deeply religious man, a figure of authority in their small town. He was devoted to his congregation, leading them with strong sermons, counseling troubled souls, and organizing church activities. To outsiders, he was a pillar of faith, a man of wisdom and righteousness. But inside his home, he was distant, not cruel, not unkind, just absent. The weight of grief hung over him like a thick fog, and instead of drawing closer to his daughter, he buried himself in his work. With his pastoral duties keeping him occupied and his heart too heavy to engage with Stacy, he made what he believed was the best decision for his daughter's care. He entrusted her to his younger brother, Uncle Leonard. Leonard was everything Michael wasn't. He was charming, easygoing, and had a way of making people feel at ease. He had a bright smile and a playful manner that made him well-liked by the community. Children loved him because he always had a joke to share, a sweet treat in his pocket, or a funny story to tell. Parents trusted him because he seemed responsible and affectionate, the kind of uncle any child would be lucky to have. And so Stacy was sent to stay with Uncle Leonard. At first it seemed fine. He cooked for her, helped with her homework, and even bought her new drawing books. He acted like the perfect guardian, always making sure she ate well and dressed properly. When she had nightmares about her mother, he was there to soothe her, telling her that everything would be okay. But something changed. It started subtly, small moments that made Stacy uncomfortable, but that she didn't fully understand. A lingering touch on her shoulder, a hug that lasted too long, a look in his eyes that made her skin crawl. She didn't know why she felt uneasy. After all, he was her uncle, her family. Wasn't he supposed to love her? Then came the threats. The first time it happened, she tried to tell someone. She tried to tell a neighbor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Adele, who always complimented her drawings. She stammered, her tiny voice unsure, but before she could get the words out, Leonard appeared. His hand gripped her wrist so tightly it hurt. Later that night, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, his voice low and chilling. "If you tell anyone," he murmured, "your father will send you away. You'll have nowhere to go, and no one will believe you." She wanted to believe that he was wrong, that if she ran to her father, he would scoop her into his arms and protect her. But her father had barely spoken to her since her mother died. He was always too busy, too preoccupied, and deep down, Stacy was afraid he would look at her with disappointment instead of love. But still, Stacy wanted to tell her father, no matter what. There were so many times when the words sat at the tip of her tongue, waiting to spill out. She would stand in the doorway of his study, hands clasped tightly in front of her, heart pounding in her chest. Her father, Pastor Michael, would be seated at his desk, flipping through his Bible or preparing his sermon notes. He always looked busy, too busy. "Papa?" she would start, her voice small, uncertain. "Yes, my dear?" He wouldn't look up right away, his eyes still focused on his work. She hesitated, her fingers curling into the hem of her dress. This was her chance. If she could just say it, if she could just tell him what Uncle Leonard was doing, maybe everything would change. Maybe she could finally be safe. But before she could find the courage, he would sigh, close his book, and glance at his watch. "We will talk later, Stacy," he would say, standing up and grabbing his coat. "I'm late for service." And just like that, the moment would pass. Sometimes she would follow him down the hall, desperate to hold on to the conversation before it slipped away. "Papa, it's really important. We will talk later, my dear. I promise," he would say, patting her head absent-mindedly before stepping out the door. Later never came. At dinner, he would ask if she had eaten, remind her to pray before bed, and tell her how proud he was of her. But he never noticed how her smile never reached her eyes. He never saw how she flinched when Uncle Leonard walked into the room. And Stacy began to wonder if maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he knew something was wrong. Maybe deep down he sensed that his daughter was breaking, that something terrible was happening right under his nose. But facing the truth would mean admitting that he had failed to protect her. And Pastor Michael was a man of faith, a man who was supposed to guide others. How could he not have noticed his own child suffering? So he drowned himself in his duties, convinced himself that his daughter was simply grieving, that her quietness was just the weight of losing her mother. He never stopped to ask if there was more. And Stacy stopped trying. She learned that her father's world revolved around the church, the congregation, the people who looked up to him. She was just one child, one small voice in the midst of all the prayers, sermons, and responsibilities. She stopped waiting by his study door. She stopped following him down the hall. She stopped believing that later would ever come. So she kept quiet. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Uncle Leonard's threats were a shadow that followed Stacy everywhere. They were not always spoken in words. Sometimes it was just a look, a lingering glance that reminded her that she was never truly safe. Other times it was a whisper in the dark, a warning laced with cruelty, wrapping around her throat like an invisible noose. He made sure she understood that silence was her only option. At first, his threats were subtle. "You don't want to upset your father, do you?" he would say, tilting his head as if he were genuinely concerned. "He's already been through so much. Imagine how heartbroken he would be if he knew you were lying about me." Lying. That was how he framed it, as if Stacy was the problem, as if the truth wasn't real unless he allowed it to be. Then the threats became sharper. "If you tell anyone, no one will believe you. Who do you think they'll trust? A little girl or me, the loving uncle who has been taking care of you?" She didn't know how to argue against that. He was right. Everyone loved him. He was the uncle who bought children's sweets after church, the man who always helped carry groceries for the old women in the community, the one who spoke with kindness and laughter. And she was just a child, a quiet child, a grieving child. Who would listen to her? But when he sensed that words alone weren't enough to keep her quiet, he became crueler. One evening, as she sat in the living room, staring blankly at her untouched plate of food, Leonard leaned down beside her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you ever tell anyone," he murmured, his fingers tightening around her wrist, "I will make sure something bad happens to you, to your father." Her breath hitched. Her father. It wasn't a direct threat, but it didn't need to be. She imagined it immediately. Something terrible happening to Pastor Michael. Something irreversible. All because she had opened her mouth. And Leonard knew. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and he smiled, patting her cheek as if he had just given her a gentle lesson. "That's a good girl," he said. "Now eat your food." She tried. She forced down every bite, chewing mechanically, her hands shaking under the table. From that night on, she didn't try to tell anyone again. Whenever she saw an opportunity, when a teacher asked her why she had become so quiet, when a church member noticed how tired she always looked, when a friend asked if she was okay, the words would rise in her throat, desperate to escape. But then she would hear Leonard's voice in her head. "Something bad will happen," and she would swallow the words back down. She became a prisoner in her own silence. She learned how to hide her pain. She forced herself to smile when Leonard was around others, knowing that if she didn't, he would make her regret it later. She became quieter, her once bubbly personality shrinking into the shadows. She stopped drawing, stopped reading. The things that once brought her joy now felt meaningless. People noticed the change. "Stacy used to be so lively," Mrs. Adele commented one day. "She hardly talks anymore." "She's just adjusting," Pastor Michael said dismissively. It's been a difficult year for her. No one pressed further. Leonard continued to play his role perfectly. He was the devoted uncle, the man who was taking care of his brother's child out of the goodness of his heart. No one questioned his intentions. But Stacy's silent storm raged on. There was a night Stacy couldn't take it anymore. She had spent too many nights curled up in fear, too many days forcing smiles while her soul withered inside her. The weight of silence pressed down on her, suffocating her, eating her from the inside out. Every time she tried to speak, no words would come. Every time she thought about telling someone, Uncle Leonard's voice echoed in her mind. No one will believe you. Your father will send you away. You will be alone. But that night, something in her snapped. She had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. She always listened. She had learned to tell when his footsteps were coming closer, when his shadow loomed outside her door. She had learned the pattern of his movements, how he always waited until the house was silent, how he never rushed, as if he enjoyed knowing she was trapped. But that night, she wasn't going to wait. Her heart pounded as she slipped out of bed, her tiny feet making no sound against the cold floor. The kitchen. That was where she needed to go. She tiptoed through the darkness, her breath caught in her throat. She felt like she was walking on the edge of a cliff, every step heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. The knife was in the drawer, the big one, the one her mother used to cut meat. Stacy's small fingers wrapped around the handle, the cold steel sending shivers through her. It was heavy, heavier than she expected, but she tightened her grip. She wasn't strong, she wasn't big, but she was tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of being silent, tired of waiting for someone to save her. Her plan wasn't perfect. She didn't even know if she had a plan. But when she heard the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards, her body moved before her mind could stop her. She ran. She ran toward him, the knife clutched in both hands, her arms shaking but determined. She wasn't thinking anymore, just moving, just fighting. She aimed for his stomach, his chest, anywhere that would make him stop. But Uncle Leonard was faster. He caught her wrist in one swift motion, his grip like an iron shackle. Stacy gasped, struggling, twisting, but he was too strong. He wrenched the knife from her hands as easily as plucking a leaf from a tree. The blade clattered to the floor, and in the dim light of the hallway, she saw something terrifying. He was smiling. Not angry, not shocked, just amused. "Ah, little Stacy," he murmured, gripping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "Is this how you thank me for taking care of you?" Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You think you can fight me?" His voice was low, mocking. "You are just a little girl." She wanted to scream, to hit him, to make him feel even an ounce of the terror she felt every day. But she knew. She knew she had lost. She was too small, too weak, and he enjoyed knowing it. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "If you ever try something like this again," he whispered, "I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand?" Stacy didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't cry. She just stood there frozen as he let her go and walked away, leaving the knife lying on the floor between them. That night, Stacy realized something. She couldn't fight him. Not like this. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted to escape, she needed to be smarter. She needed a different kind of weapon. As time passed, she became smarter, more careful. She observed, she planned. She knew she couldn't stay in that house forever. She needed a way out. And then an opportunity came. One Sunday after church service, Pastor Michael received an invitation to a religious conference in another city. He would be gone for a full week. That night, as Leonard sat across from her at the dinner table, eating as if nothing was wrong, Stacy made up her mind. She needed proof. She needed to make sure that if she ever told someone, they wouldn't doubt her. She started paying attention to where Leonard kept his phone, his laptop, any notes or messages. She had noticed before that he sometimes took pictures. She didn't understand why, but she knew it wasn't right. If she could find those pictures, she could show someone. The night before her father was set to leave, she sneaked into Leonard's room. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he would hear it in his sleep. She found his phone on the nightstand and, with trembling hands, unlocked it. Her breath hitched. There they were, the proof. But she had to be careful. If he caught her, she didn't know what he would do. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She needed to get out, now. She turned to leave, but the floor creaked beneath her feet. Leonard stirred. Panic shot through her like lightning. She sprinted out of the room, gripping the phone tightly. She ran down the hall, down the stairs, out into the cold night air. She didn't stop. She ran until she reached the police station. She didn't know how she found the words, but she told them everything. She showed them the phone, the pictures. The officers exchanged dark looks before one of them gently led her inside. The storm was no longer silent. By the time Pastor Michael returned, Leonard had been arrested. The town was in shock. Whispers spread like wildfire. No one could believe it. Pastor Michael fell to his knees when he realized what had been happening under his nose. The guilt was suffocating. He had failed his daughter in the worst way possible. But Stacy was free. The road to healing was long. There were nights when she still woke up trembling, memories clawing at her mind. But she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, her father saw her, truly saw her. He held her tightly and promised he would never let her down again. And Stacy, though broken, knew one thing. She had survived the storm, and one day the sun would shine again.